Hi, I'm Femi OK. In today's bonus edition of The Stream, the sneaky strategy that some politicians in the US have been using for years to manipulate elections. And in Afghanistan, we ask if journalism can survive the Taliban. We start with Richard Curtis, the well-known writer, director, producer, and a passionate advocate for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. When I spoke to Richard on Instagram, there were loads of questions for him, including one from Mercedes, who wanted to know why in an age where technology can make things happen in seconds, we are moving so slowly with the global goals.
By the way, one of the global goals is to get the internet to everyone.
Yeah, it's a human right.
And that's moving fast. One of the things that the internet and technology have done is spread words about Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and Fridays for the Future with great speed and great passion and made people very famous. So there's some good stuff happening. The development of the COVID vaccine, absolutely incredible. I mean, the real answer is there's not as much money in trying to do things for the poorest people than there is for the rich people, which is why there are more cures for baldness than there are cures for malaria. You know, that is the problem.
Yeah.
But I think it's, you know, one of those times. I just think anyone listening to this who thinks, I'm going to do a startup, I'm going to do something technological, it's up to you. We're all the necessary heroes of the moment. It's actually often businesses are run by people, you know, who don't have perfect motives. So anyone out there who's got perfect motives, use your skill, your technology, and you start to get the job done. My daughter started an online campaign about period poverty in the UK, and within 2 months the government changed the law.
Oh, so, 2 months? Is that all it took?
Yeah, they just needed a bit of enthusiasm and not that much money, and all the female MPs to back it.
Yeah. Well, okay, I was going to say, give us an example, and then there you were with the example. All right, this is Tino. Tino says the goals are so colourful that they basically should, under normal circumstances, attract everyone. Like everyone should know about the SDGs, the global goals, however you want to refer to them. Because you've really gone out of, not you, Richard, but everybody's gone out of their way to make them appealing. I've seen animations and graphics and just explanations about what they mean, why they're important, making the connections.
Yeah, I mean, look, all I would say is, don't be optimistic about the people who don't know stuff. I mean, don't be pessimistic because of that. I remember once reading that Margaret Thatcher had been Prime Minister of the UK for 10 years, and yet still only 90% of the UK people had heard of her. So, do you know what I mean? Where the others were living, I don't know. But I always say,
they need to get out more.
Every person who knows about the goals, if there's that great quote saying, don't think a small group of people can't change the world, because in fact that's the only way it's ever happened. You know, so what I'd say is if everyone who knows something about the goals does something about the goals, they will succeed.
I am thinking about your next passion project, or your current passion project. I love the to-do list, so that is getting out there right now. How far ahead are you when you plan, when you strategize?
Well, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. You know, sometimes you'll have an idea and say, let's do this at Christmas. I mean, I tell you, it seems dull, but it's the most interesting in the world. I'm very obsessed by pensions at the moment, or superannuation.
Why would that be, Richard?
Well, no, I mean, not only because I'm about to start collecting mine, but do you know, in the world, pensions are an investment fund of 50 trillion. I mean, that is more than we need for the goals. And anybody young who takes out a pension, they've got a choice. Do you want ethical, sustainable pension that's going to support, you know, affordable housing and renewable energy and brilliant new startups? Or do you want an old-style pension that's probably in arms, deforestation, fossil fuels, and everything like that? Now, there's an instant thing that people can change. I started a campaign called Make My Money Matter. And so far, we've moved 500 billion in the UK alone, so that suddenly anyone who's got money in a bank or in a pension or in insurance, you can insist that your money is working every day. You can go to the beach and your money will be supporting some brilliant project. Whereas now there's a real danger that you're sitting there fighting for peace and your money's actually paying for arms.
Yeah.
So, you know, I keep trying to find little specific things that people can act on, and pensions is one of the ones that I'm most passionate about. And then this summer we did a brilliant project in London, which we actually stuck a forest in the middle of built-up London.
Yeah.
Called the Forest for Change, and we're trying to get everybody to go there and say what change they want in the world. So I'm trying to make beautiful things and try and do practical things as well.
Beautiful and practical. Here is a shot of the Forest for Change that Richard just mentioned. It was just around the corner from Waterloo Tube Station, literally in the middle of London. Thanks for sharing, Richard. Okay, full confession here. I have my doubts about dedicating an entire stream episode to gerrymandering in the US. It's a strategy that politicians use to control electoral boundaries so that they can include voters they want in their district and marginalise the voters that they don't. That's way too in the weeds for an international audience, I thought, but I was so wrong. Katie Fahey, Walter Olson and David Daly's enthusiasm for combating gerrymandering was infectious and made for a brilliant conversation. Here they are in the post-show talking about how to stop this very undemocratic practice.
The best example of how gerrymandering can be combated is on this panel. It's Katie Fahey and what she did in Michigan and the story of how she marshaled hundreds of thousands of volunteers to fix gerrymandering in a state where the system was dysfunctional and completely broken. So it is a pleasure to be on here with a democracy hero as well as another democracy hero in Walter. So I would say this. I think one of the examples that speaks to how problematic gerrymandering can be is North Carolina's 11th district in the western mountain part of the state, which throughout the 2000s was a really interesting swing district. It went back and forth between Republicans and Democrats as political winds shifted. In 2010, Republicans won the control of North Carolina state legislature and the power to redraw those lines. They were determined to draw themselves a 10-3 map in the state, and in order to do so, they had to crack Asheville in half. They had to draw a line through the middle of the biggest city in western North Carolina, and they attached it to two conservative whiter areas, and as a result, this town that had made a district swing back and forth was cracked among two districts. The man who steps forth in an open Republican primary, because when you've got an uncompetitive seat like this, the only thing that matters is the party primary. And so the most wild base candidate of either side tends to actually win that. This guy had been a sandwich shop proprietor. His name was Mark Meadows. You might have learned his name when he became the chief of staff to Donald Trump. But his path to power was paved by gerrymandering. That's what gave him his seat in Congress and his seat at the table.
Oh, good story, Walter. Keep the narration going.
Well, let me start with a triumph story, because in Pennsylvania, you saw the virtues of something that is becoming popular on the states, which is inviting the public to submit their own maps. And you set up a portal by which they can do it by computer. They can submit what they think the map should look like. And this is being used in various states. But my favorite example is from Pennsylvania, because the Pennsylvania legislature had passed a really awful gerrymander, one of these classic terrible ones. But because there was public map submission, a piano teacher from Allentown, Pennsylvania, had submitted a map, and when the case got litigated up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they pointed to her map and they said, her map is so obviously better than what you legislators did. We're going to declare, they threw out the legislators' map because the map submitted by a member of the public was better.
Fantastic.
This is a great win.
Yeah.
Now, if there's time, I'll tell about a story, which is we found in our Maryland hearings, and this goes back to David's point about the technology getting better and better and better for but good or ill. But we found that they had drawn lines to go around individual buildings so as to try to stick one of their rivals with the worst possible electorate. They snaked around individual buildings.
So petty.
I think there's only one thing left, which is invading individual houses to separate the husband from the wife.
You know, and someone will try, Walter. Katie, wrap us up. What's your story?
Sure. Sure, I think I'll just start with our story. So in Michigan, there was the Flint water crisis, which basically has actually its roots in gerrymandering. There was a law passed that the people of Michigan actually tried to repeal, basically saying that if your city is in financial distress, the governor can put somebody in charge to make your decisions, and you didn't elect that person. The people of Michigan gather a bunch of petition signatures, they repeal this law. The newly gerrymandered legislature, their first action they do is they find a loophole and reinstate that law. That law and that decision ends up switching the water source for a primarily minority community, Flint, Michigan, to a different water source that ends up poisoning the entire city with lead in their water. And me being recently out of college, driving to work every day, hearing about the Flint water crisis, and basically just listening to politicians point the finger one at another, no, it was your fault, no, it was your fault, and nobody taking accountability, I just couldn't keep going to work knowing that nobody was trying to prevent the next Flint water crisis and that our current redistricting process offered no accountability. So I made that Facebook post, not knowing how to end gerrymandering, just saying hey, does anybody else want to help? And suddenly I saw that I wasn't alone. There were actually thousands of people who had been frustrated with gerrymandering for years and years and years, but didn't realize we could do something about it. So we made an online group, me and a bunch of strangers, and we started trying to Google, how do you end gerrymandering in Michigan? And we found out we had to write constitutional language, so we crowdsourced that. We went around our state. We held 33 town halls in 33 days asking people, do you like the current system? If you don't like it, what do you think is fair? And we kept track of everybody's answers. We wrote the language, and then we had to gather a bunch of signatures in 180 days, and we mapped out, we found the rest stops where cars stop in between holiday. And for Thanksgiving, we literally set up booths at these rest stops when people would stop to have them sign the petitions. We were at football games. We were all across the state, gathered plenty of signatures from every single county, and then ultimately talked to millions of people to vote yes on this. And what's really the most exciting part is right now we have an independent commission, 13 strangers who all don't have a strong political background, are going around the state, listening to our citizens, trying to work with as much integrity as they can to make sure these lines are drawn fairly and actually representing the people of Michigan.
And that's how you make gerrymandering an exciting conversation on the stream. Thanks, Katie, Walter, and David. In Afghanistan, we are seeing opportunities for journalists to work freely shrinking. Geziya Hanyard shared a horrifying story about being beaten by the Taliban. It made for a sobering post-show discussion. Here's Al Jazeera's Ali Latifi.
It's the sad reality, It's like I said earlier. Why is Rotib in Paris? He's not the only one. There are other journalists there. There are photographers there. There are artists there. I myself, why am I in Doha right now? And I'm thinking about going back, and I'm wondering what is the value in going back if you have to operate in the Islamic Emirate? If not only do you have to worry about the potential for violence, but you also know that everything you do has to go through this group in one way or another, whether it's directly or indirectly. They will be in charge of what you cover, and they will make sure that what you cover is somehow in line with what they want. You can't just get in I used to be able to get in a car and with all the dangers, with the IEDs, with the checkpoints, everything, go to the districts of the country, or hop on a plane and go to another province and then get in a rickshaw and go to the districts and villages. You can't do that anymore. Everything requires some kind of interaction with them, some kind of approval by them, some kind of monitoring by them. That's not journalism anymore.
Are they afraid?
And
do you think the Taliban is afraid of its image getting out, that it's not an image that they can control?
I think the Taliban doesn't know what it wants. If you interact with any of them, you realize they're not the smartest guys in the room. And, they will just say things that they've memorized that don't actually mean anything. And that's how they're running their government at this moment, because you have their higher up saying all of these great things about, for instance, press freedom, but then how do their guys get out of an armored car? Where did they get the armored car from? And then beat up a journalist in one of the most busy areas of the city for asking day laborers what the economy is like? And they still haven't answered for it. They haven't answered for that. They haven't answered for what they did to the newspaper reporters, and they haven't answered for what they did to the photographer in Herat, because they have no answers.
Gypsy, I'm just wondering in what way you're able to support journalists in Afghanistan who are being harassed, who are being beaten, and who are being deciding that it's too dangerous a profession for them to stay in. What are you able to do? What support can come from outside? Is that even possible?
So it is possible. And I should say that we began, the situation began deteriorating in January, more or less, as the Taliban increased its advance and control of the country. One of the things that we have been trying to do is to support journalists from abroad, along with other press freedom groups, to remain safe to the extent possible in the country. So that means directing people to safe houses. That means ensuring that people follow digital security guidelines. There are people who have had to scrub their social media or, scrub their phones to make sure that there is no evidence, quote unquote, found of some kind of activity that may get them into trouble. There are people who have had to lower their public profile. So that's the in-country component, and we are continuing to work very hard at this. The other is trying to help those who want to leave and need to leave in order to preserve their life, frankly, to do so, to find safe passage and to do so safely. At this point, obviously, post-withdrawal, we continue to engage with various governments to find paths for resettlement, relocation for journalists, Afghan journalists. And we have been, to some degree, successful. We have managed to help 46 journalists and their families leave the country, and are trying to find safe refuge for them.
International community didn't taking any action about Afghan journalists. The action that will be a whole good for all of the journalists, and some few of journalists are already go to the foreign countries and they're now safe. But more of the journalists is also now in Afghanistan. They're creating, and this is the issue that international community and the association of supporting journalists, they should take action for these people who are in Afghanistan. Also, the journalists who are also in Doha or other third countries, their situation in their life is up to now unclear, and they're not knowing that what will be happen in next and where will be they moved. And these tips also the foreign countries, international community will help in third countries with journalists, like in Uzbekistan, like in Tajikistan, like in Pakistan. Already some of the journalists moved there, and they're trying to go to the other countries that they will be safe there, and also their life will be good in these countries, and they need the help. And also, one thing from Afghanistan, some departure of the family of some peoples who are not related to journalists, but they go by the name of journalists to the foreign countries. Some of the association of journalists, they've taken them to the other countries that they're not journalists, but they're going by the name of journalists that more of journalists in Afghanistan in this situation and by this action is very nervous, and they're very damaged about this situation. And it's important that international community supports journalists in this bad situation. And this is, if they do not support them in this situation, I think they will be not safe, and we will be face the new threats. We will be face the situation that will be not good in the next for media and for journalists.
I just have one more question. Thank you, Zia. Thank you, Gypsy. For you, Ali, when will you be able to be in Afghanistan and report freely? When do you think that might be?
I can't foresee that in the Islamic Emirate, to be quite honest.
You can watch the full episode about the current state of press freedom in Afghanistan and all the stream shows at stream.aljazeera.com. Finally, an example of the stellar guests the Stream team books for you every single week. Public health activist Achal Prabhala talked to me recently about COVID vaccine inequity. In the same show, Lisa McCarley unpacked the Britney Spears conservatorship story. Now, after the show, I asked Lisa to chat to Achal about vaccines and Achal to talk to Lisa about Britney. Let's see how that worked out.
Achal, I've heard you speak about COVID vaccine inequity. I'm concerned about it right here in the United States. Do you feel that that's a result of inequity in incomes, or is that the result of politics?
I feel that in all countries, what the pandemic has done is it's exposed existing inequalities. I see this in India and I see this in the United States, where people who are citizens of a country feel less entitled to get services that is their right to have, including COVID vaccines. So to the extent that you're poor, to the extent that you're disconnected from the centers of power, the less empowered you feel to deserve a vaccine or to find where you can get one. This is certainly the case in India, and I think to a less extent, the lack of vaccine equity within the United States, I think, speaks to existing inequities in the country that are not going to go away just because there's a pandemic.
So, Achal, when Lisa joined us on the stream, she came to talk about Britney Spears' conservatorships and Britney's particular situation. Bearing that in mind, what incisive question do you have for Lisa?
I find it astonishing that a person with as much success, as much income, as much publicity as Britney Spears would be in a situation well into her adulthood, where on the basis of a temporary situation, perhaps with her emotional well-being, she can be forced into a position of servitude like this for the rest of her life without this kind of publicity. Do you think there are ways by which the publicity that she got is crucial to her conservatorship being revoked or removed? And if she hadn't been Britney Spears, how would this have worked out?
That's such a great question. And I absolutely am convinced that the love and compassion of her fans at the incept, which created the Free Britney movement, which created documentaries where we got to see some facts that were very disturbing in terms of what transpired, which created new legislation, which created this worldwide involvement and interest. There's no doubt in my mind that if the fans didn't show up and just, they were laughed at, they were ridiculed, but they absolutely had everything to do with getting to the point where people became aware of the many, many legal violations of Britney's rights that took place in order to result in an 13-year-old basically, as you said, servitude, where she was exploited for 13 years. So yes, Britney's fans deserve all the credit. And unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that there are many people who are far less famous and far less wealthy that I personally represent that would never have a chance of getting out of a wrongful conservatorship. And I'm still trying to find the way to make their messages heard as well.
Lisa and Achal do an excellent job of asking tough questions. And that's our show for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time.